The rain was drumming against the thick glass window, heavy drops sliding down like tears. I sat in the cozy corner of the cafe, sipping my tea and nibbling on a pastry, watching muddy streams wash down the pedestrian street outside. The world beyond the window was gray and wet, a blur of umbrellas and raincoats. Inside, it was warm and smelled of cinnamon and fresh coffee. A small bell above the entrance door jingled. I leaned sideways, craning my neck with idle curiosity. A couple, soaked from head to toe, burst in with cheerful laughter, shaking water from their jackets like dogs after a bath. They were young, carefree, holding hands. I felt a familiar pang in my chest. Not jealousy, exactly. More like a hollow ache where something used to be. I glanced at my phone. My friend Megan was already 15 minutes late. That was so like her. I had specifically told her this conversation was important. Important enough that she should try, just this once, to be on time. But Megan lived in her own time zone, one where clocks moved slower and promises meant less. 3 years ago, I lost my husband and my unborn child. Steve had gotten into enduro racing, tearing through forests and bumpy trails on his dirt bike. It was his weekend escape, his way of blowing off steam from a stressful job. On that particular Saturday, he went with his friends to the woods not far from our house, to a special track they'd built themselves. To this day, no one knows who had a problem with the bikers. No one knows who stretched that steel wire between two thick pines. But they did it at neck height, exactly the height of a rider's throat. And I still don't understand why the investigator thought it was a good idea to show a pregnant woman her husband's severed head. Steve and I had been together for 6 years. He was overjoyed when I told him I was pregnant. He wanted a son, talked about teaching him to ride a bike, to fish, to build things with his hands. We had picked out names. We had painted the nursery a soft, warm yellow. After the funeral, I locked myself in our apartment. I didn't go out for months. The world outside felt like a foreign country, one where I no longer spoke the language. I didn't want to live. I didn't want to eat. I didn't want to see anyone. Time passed, as it does. After about a year, I started to come back to myself, bit by bit. Family and friends tried to comfort me. They said the usual things. Time heals all wounds. You're still young. You'll find someone new. Someone new. The thought made me sick. Not only because I loved Steve and couldn't imagine anyone else beside me, but because before Steve, no one had ever looked at me twice. I was the quiet girl, the plain one, the one who faded into the background. Steve saw me. Steve loved me. How could there ever be anyone else? And then, a month ago, Megan came over to my apartment. We'd had a few drinks. Okay, more than a few. She'd brought an expensive bottle of cognac, and we'd made a dent in it. Megan was sprawled on my couch, her cheeks flushed, her words starting to slur. "Alice, my darling," she said, pointing a wobbly finger at me. "You need a man, a real man. You can't go on like this. You're a hot woman. You've got, the assets." She gestured vaguely at my chest. "Not like those stick figures walking around. You need to put yourself out there. I rolled my eyes. Megan, please. I'm fine. No, no, no. Listen to me. She grabbed her phone from the coffee table and started scrolling furiously, ignoring my protests. I found this thing, this fortune teller online. She gives advice on how to improve your life. Rituals, spells, all that stuff. Megan, you're drunk. So are you. Anyway, listen. She shoved the phone in my face. I had to lean back to see the screen. It was a YouTube video. A woman in a dark room, wrapped in colorful scarves, sitting behind a table covered in candles and strange objects. She has a ritual, a love attraction ritual. It's simple. You just have to go into the woods at night during the full moon. I stared at her. Are you serious? Woods? Full moon? What's next? Dancing naked around a fire? Megan's eyes lit up. Actually, yes. Naked. Well, mostly naked. I laughed. I couldn't help it. The whole idea was absurd. Wait. Let me read it exactly. She squinted at her phone and began reciting in a deliberately spooky, exaggerated voice. Take fresh milk. Add a few drops of your own blood. Go into the forest at midnight under the full moon. Light 3 candles. Strip off your clothes. Pour the milk over yourself while saying, As the moon shines bright, so shall my beauty bloom. With milk and blood I wash myself. I call upon woman's happiness to come to me. She lowered the phone, grinning. Cool, right? Megan, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You're the stupidest thing I've ever heard, she shot back, which made no sense but sounded very convincing in her drunken state. She pulled back the curtain and pointed at the window. Look, full moon, right there. Let's go. I looked. A perfect pale circle hung in the dark sky, glowing like an eye watching the world. It was beautiful in a cold, indifferent way. Megan, I'm not going into the woods at midnight to pour milk on myself. Why not? What else are you doing? Sitting at home alone, crying over Steve? Her voice softened, but the words still stung. Alice, you deserve to be happy. What's the worst that could happen? You get cold and wet and we have a funny story to tell? I hesitated. The cognac was warm in my belly, making everything feel slightly unreal, slightly possible. And maybe, just maybe, a tiny part of me wanted to believe, wanted to hope that something, anything, could change. Fine, I said. But if I get hypothermia, you're carrying me home. We didn't have fresh milk. We used regular store-bought milk from a carton, pouring it into a plastic water bottle. We didn't have church candles. We used the small, colorful birthday candles left over from my last birthday. They'll work, Megan said with absolute certainty. Fire is fire. And so, 2 drunk fools, we stumbled out into the night. The forest was only a couple of kilometers from my apartment. We walked along the sleeping streets, our heels clicking on the wet pavement, laughing too loud and shushing each other. We fell twice, once on a patch of wet leaves, once when Megan's heel got stuck in a drain grate. We didn't meet anyone, thank God. No cops, no drunks, no predators. Just us and the moon and the growing darkness. Megan led me deep into the woods, pushing through fallen branches and thorny bushes. I scratched my arms, my legs, my face. The cold air bit at my lungs. Finally, she found a small clearing between the trees, a circle of bare earth surrounded by dark pines that seemed to lean inward, watching. She stuck the tiny candles into the damp ground, arranging them in a semicircle. Then she turned to me. Okay, strip. What? Strip. You heard the ritual. Naked. Come on, Alice, don't chicken out now. I looked around. The trees were dark shapes, the moonlight filtering through the branches in pale, ghostly streaks. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. It was absurd. It was insane. But I was already here. I pulled off my sweater, then my shirt, shivering as the cold air hit my skin. My bra followed, then my jeans, then everything else. I stood naked in the middle of the forest, the wet grass cold against my bare feet, the moonlight painting my skin silver. Now the milk, Megan said, handing me the plastic bottle. And the blood. You have to cut yourself. I took the small kitchen knife we'd brought, a stupid, dangerous thing to carry into the woods, but we weren't thinking clearly. I pressed the blade to my fingertip. The first 3 times, nothing happened. The 4th time, I pressed harder, and a thin line of red welled up, bright against my pale skin. I squeezed a few drops into the milk bottle, then shook it. Now pour it over yourself and say the words, Megan instructed. She was standing back, her phone's screen glowing as she read the incantation. I held the bottle over my head. The milk was cold, shockingly, painfully cold. I tipped the bottle, and the white liquid cascaded over my hair, my face, my shoulders, my breasts, my belly. It ran down my legs, dripping onto the ground. I smelled sour milk and iron, my own blood. And I said the words, my voice trembling with cold and fear and something else, something I couldn't name. As the moon shines bright, so shall my beauty bloom. With milk and blood I wash myself. I call upon woman's happiness to come to me. Nothing happened. The forest was silent. The candles flickered. Then a wind rose, sudden, cold, inexplicable. It blew out the candles. It rattled the branches overhead. And I felt, for just a moment, as if something was watching me from the darkness between the trees. Something old, something patient. Did you feel that? I whispered. Feel what? Megan was already pulling on my arm. Come on, let's go. I'm freezing. We stumbled back through the woods, laughing nervously, trying to pretend nothing had happened. I don't remember getting home. I don't remember falling into bed. But I woke up the next morning in my own bed, naked, sticky with dried milk, covered in dirt and pine needles, with a splitting headache. Megan was on the couch, in almost the same state. She smelled like sour milk and stale alcohol. I forgot about the stupid ritual pretty quickly. Work was busy. A deadline was approaching, and I spent long hours at my computer, falling into bed exhausted every night. I usually sleep deeply, like the dead. Only my morning alarm can wake me. But one night, I woke up. I opened my eyes, lying on my back, staring at the ceiling. The room was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the streetlight outside. I didn't know why I'd woken up. There was no sound, no touch, nothing unusual. And then I felt it. My bed is wide, a king size that Steve and I had bought together. I sleep on the left side. The right side has been empty for 3 years. I've never even sat on it since Steve died. It's his side, sacred, untouched. But now, the mattress on the right side was slowly sinking. I felt the fabric stretch, heard the faint creak of springs under weight. Someone, something, had sat down on Steve's side of the bed. I didn't have time to be scared. I didn't have time to think. I just lifted my head and looked. The window on the right has a sheer curtain that reaches the floor. The streetlight outside shone through it, illuminating the room in a pale yellow glow. And silhouetted against that light was a dark, hunched figure sitting on my bed. I screamed. I scrambled out of bed, banging my elbow on the nightstand, knocking over a glass of water. I lunged for the door, slammed my hand against the light switch, and the room flooded with harsh, white light. No one was there. The bed was empty. The room was empty. I was alone. I stood there for a long time, my back against the door, breathing hard, my heart slamming against my ribs. I searched the room, under the bed, in the closet, behind the curtains. Nothing. The windows were locked. The front door was locked. No one could have gotten in. I was on the 3rd floor. It was a dream, I told myself. A nightmare. You're stressed. You're grieving. You imagined it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen, drinking coffee, watching the sky turn gray. When morning came, I almost convinced myself it had been nothing. But the next night, I woke again. I was lying on my side, facing the wall, my back to the empty half of the bed. I was groggy, half asleep, my mind slow and thick. I wanted to roll over, to stretch, to go back to sleep. And then I realized. Someone was lying behind me. I felt them, the weight of their body on the mattress, the warmth of their breath against the back of my neck. They were lying on Steve's side, close to me, so close that if I moved, I would touch them. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. Every muscle in my body was frozen. My heart pounded so hard I was sure they could hear it. The mattress creaked. The figure shifted, propping itself up on one elbow. I saw its shadow on the wall, a broad, human-shaped silhouette. It was a man, or something that looked like a man. And then I must have fainted, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the window and I was alone. But when I got up, I saw them. On the right side of the bed, Steve's side, on the white sheet, there were tiny crumbs of dark earth and a few dry pine needles. I called Megan. I told her everything. I asked her what I should do. She laughed. "Alice, sweetie, it was a nightmare. You were drunk. You're still freaked out about the ritual. It's nothing." "The dirt, Megan. The pine needles. From our walk in the woods. You probably tracked them in and didn't notice. Look, if you're really scared, go to church. Light a candle. It'll make you feel better." Her words calmed me a little. I did go to church. I stood in the back, too embarrassed to talk to the priest, and lit a candle for Steve. I prayed for peace. I prayed for sleep. For a few nights I slept without waking. But then it came back. I woke in the dark, lying on my right side facing the window. The streetlight was bright, too bright. I squinted, annoyed at myself for not closing the curtains. And then I saw him. The dark figure was sitting on the edge of the bed on Steve's side. He was hunched forward, his hands resting on his knees, his head bowed. He was a man, broad shoulders, thick arms. But his shape was wrong. His back was too wide, his neck too thick. And he was completely, utterly black, as if he absorbed all the light around him. He must have felt me looking, because he moved. He turned his head, not his body, just his head, and looked at me. I couldn't see his face. There were no features, just deeper shadows where eyes and mouth should have been. But I felt his gaze. It was heavy, hungry, cold. I squeezed my eyes shut. "It's a dream," I told myself. "It's a dream, it's a dream, it's a dream." The mattress creaked. I felt a warm, rough hand touch my cheek. I screamed. I threw off the hand. It was solid, real, heavy, and ran to the kitchen. I paced back and forth, hyperventilating, drinking glass after glass of water. I couldn't go back to the bedroom. I couldn't call the police. My phone was in there, next to the thing. When the sky began to lighten, I grabbed a frying pan from the kitchen and crept back into the bedroom. The room was empty. The bed was empty. But on the floor and on the sheets, there were fresh pine needles. The police came 2 hours after I called. 2 officers, young and bored, walked through my apartment. They checked the windows, the doors, the locks. They looked under the bed and in the closet. They asked me questions. Had I been drinking? Was I on any medication? Had I seen a doctor lately? They didn't say it, but I saw it in their eyes. They thought I was crazy. They thought I was a lonely, grieving widow losing her mind. "No signs of forced entry, ma'am," one of them said, not quite hiding his smirk. "Probably just a bad dream. Maybe see a therapist." They left. I stood in the middle of my apartment, shaking with anger and fear. I knew it wasn't a dream. I knew someone, something, had been in my bed, had touched my face. I couldn't stay there. I called a priest. He came that afternoon, a kind, elderly man with tired eyes. He blessed the apartment, walking through each room, sprinkling holy water, murmuring prayers. He asked me if I wanted to talk, but I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. How do you tell a priest that your dead husband might be haunting you, or that you summoned something else entirely? He left. I locked the door. And then I left too. I spent a few days at my parents' house, pretending I just missed them. I spent a night at a friend's apartment. Then I went to Megan's. She was the only one I could tell the truth to. But when I told her about the figure, the touch, the pine needles, she didn't believe me either. "Alice, you've always been sensitive. You imagine things. Take some sleeping pills. Watch less horror movies." "I don't watch horror movies," I said, sharper than I intended. "Can I stay here for a few days? I can't go back there." Megan hesitated. She looked away, fidgeted with her sleeve. "I'd love to, but there's someone coming over. A guy. You understand." I understood. I was alone. I checked into a cheap hotel. The walls were thin, the sheets were scratchy, and the radiator clanked all night. But I slept. No figures, no touches, no pine needles. I started thinking about selling the apartment, moving away, starting over somewhere else, anywhere else. Before checking into the hotel, I'd gone back to my apartment to grab more clothes. I crept inside like a thief, listening to the silence, jumping at every creak. The apartment seemed normal, quiet, empty. I went to the bedroom. I opened the dresser, pulled out some sweaters, and glanced at the photograph on top. A white frame with a picture of Steve and me at a park, sitting in a gazebo by a pond. It was his favorite photo, and I froze. There was a dry yellow pine needle stuck to the glass. Not on my side of the photo, on Steve's side. Across his throat, exactly where the wire had cut. I hadn't put that there. It hadn't been there when I left. Someone had been in my apartment while I was gone. I searched the apartment more carefully. I found crumbs of earth on the floor in the living room, on the couch, under the coffee table. I found pine needles on the armchair. The sink was still wet, as if someone had washed their hands. The soap dispenser in the bathroom was nearly empty. I'd just filled it. And the pot of borscht I'd left in the fridge was gone. I found it in the cupboard, clean and dry, stacked with the other pots. But the thing that broke me, the thing that made me sink to the floor and sob, was the coffee mugs. Steve had a habit of putting mugs upside down on the shelf after washing them. He'd tried to teach me, but I never remembered. I always put them right side up. The mugs in my cupboard were all upside down. It was Steve. Somehow, impossibly, Steve had come back. I sat on the floor for a long time, crying and thinking. Who could I tell? Who would believe me? The police had laughed. Megan had dismissed me. My parents would think I'd lost my mind. I had no one. And then, as evening fell, I made a decision. I would stay. I would wait. And I would see him. That night, I lay in bed with my eyes closed, pretending to sleep. I listened to the sounds of the apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant rumble of traffic, the soft ticking of the clock. And then I felt him. He sat down on the bed, slowly, carefully, as if he didn't want to wake me. The mattress dipped. The springs creaked. I opened my eyes. He was sitting on Steve's side, his back to me, his head bowed. He was dark, silhouetted against the curtain. I couldn't see his face, but I knew it was Steve. I wasn't afraid anymore. "Steve," I whispered. He didn't move. "I know it's you. Please, stay with me." He sat there for a long moment. Then he slowly lay down on the bed, on his side, facing away from me. I felt the warmth of his body, the weight of his presence. I reached out and touched his shoulder. It was solid, real, warm. I fell asleep, smiling. The next morning, I woke to the feeling of an arm around my waist. Steve was holding me from behind, his body curled against mine. I could feel his chest against my back, his breath on my neck. I was so happy, happier than I'd been in 3 years. I turned over slowly, carefully, not wanting to wake him. I wanted to see his face. I wanted to look into his eyes, to touch his cheek, to tell him I loved him. The face I saw was not Steve's. The skin was pale green, stretched tight over a misshapen skull. The mouth was huge, split from ear to ear, the lips cracked and black. There was no nose, just 2 crooked holes. The head was bald, but covered in bony ridges that looked like horns. The neck and shoulders were covered in coarse, dark hair, and from behind the right shoulder blade, a twisted, dry branch had grown into the flesh. But the worst, were the eyes. 2 enormous black pits with burning red coals deep inside. They were not human eyes. They were not animal eyes. They were the eyes of something ancient, something hungry, something that had been waiting in the dark for a very, very long time. I screamed. I threw myself out of bed, shoving the creature away. Its hand, long, bony fingers tipped with curved claws, scraped against my shoulder, leaving 4 burning lines of pain. How had I not seen? How had I not noticed? For weeks I had shared my bed with this thing. I had touched it. I had spoken to it. I had loved it. The monster rose from the bed. It unfolded, tall, too tall, its head brushing the ceiling. It spread its arms wide, and its mouth opened, wider than any mouth should open, revealing row after row of jagged yellow teeth. And it roared, a deep, guttural sound that shook the walls, that rattled the windows, that made the very air vibrate with terror. Then it was gone. I stood alone in my bedroom, shaking, bleeding from the scratches on my shoulder. On the floor, where the creature had been, lay a few fresh pine needles and the smell of damp earth. Megan finally arrived, 30 minutes late, clicking across the cafe floor in her heels. She hugged me tight, apologizing about traffic, about some idiot crashing into a traffic light. "So," she said, sitting down and ordering a pastry, "tell me everything. How are you?" I took a deep breath. "It's a long story. Please, just listen. Don't interrupt. Don't laugh." I told her everything. The ritual, the figure on the bed, the pine needles, the creature, the scratches. I showed her the marks on my shoulder, 4 red lines already scabbing over. Megan listened, her eyes wide, her pastry forgotten. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. That's insane," she finally said. "But I believe you. I think I believe you. What do we do?" "I don't know. Maybe we should go back to that fortune teller, the one online. Ask her how to banish it." I took a sip of my tea. The warmth felt good in my cold hands. "Maybe," I said. "But there's something else, Megan. Something I haven't told you." She leaned forward. "What?" I set down my cup and looked her in the eye. "I'm pregnant."